Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, we are talking about taking proactive steps to manage grass with continued high levels of grass growth. I'm joined by Micheal O'Leary from PastureBase Ireland and Grassland researcher Elodie Ruelle. And I started by asking Micheal about the grass situation on farm today.
Grass growth condition has been good over the last week or 10 days, I suppose. So looking at pasture-based figures, current average farm cover is somewhere around 780 kilos of dry matter per hectare, and just over 200 kilos per hectare or per livestock unit. Growth rate of roughly about 77 and demand of 60. So I suppose there is, at the moment, Emma-Louise, there is a good surplus on farms. We're growing about 17, 18 kilos above our demand, and our cover per cow is probably a bit high to where we'd like to see it this time of the year.
Where we'd like to see it this time of year? You're saying it's around 200. What's our target?
So I suppose we're now, start of June, we'd be probably hoping to have a cover per livestock unit of between 160 to 180. So I suppose we are well ahead of that target. Coming back to just simple terms, I suppose we're looking for about 10 days grass in front of the herd of cows at the moment.
And I guess for farmers on a personal level, it was a little bit dry there in May. People were probably a little bit anxious that we might see a repeat of last year. What would you say to those farmers?
Yeah, I suppose over the last 10 days, again, the weather has been quite broken. So I suppose there was talks of drought, all right. May was exceptionally dry in certain parts of the country. But I suppose up to last night, would have got all over the country, there was high rainfall, so I think this is definitely going to drive on growth for the next week to 2 weeks. So I suppose action needs to be taken straight away.
What action are we taking?
So first thing I suppose is to go just to walk your farm. If you're using the likes of PastureBase Ireland, do a farm cover to see where do you lie as regards cover per livestock unit. Have a look at your growth rates and then probably take action. One of the big things I would be telling farmers, I suppose, or kind of advising farmers, is to have a look at your pre-grazing yield and not to leave that go over 1,500 at this time of the year. So ideally grazing covers 13, 14, 1,500 kilos of dry matter, 2.5, 3 leaf stage. I suppose it changes very rapidly at the moment. We'd say if our average growth rate is somewhere around 77 kilos, we will have individual paddocks on a particular farm growing maybe double that. So I suppose they're the paddocks to watch out for, and to take them out as quick as possible as surplus silage if they do go beyond the 1,500 mark.
And I guess, with those paddocks on the farm that are growing at a very high rate, I think we need to be fairly proactive with those in terms of, I suppose, questioning their suitability for cows, particularly milking cows, in terms of, their stem creeping in there. Are you seeing an effect on farms where they're grazing those heavier stemmy type swards? Yeah,
I suppose I've been out, with a couple of discussion groups there over the last few days, and I suppose comments coming back is, I suppose, that grass is getting stemmy, and as a result, proteins are coming back slightly. So I suppose one of the main objectives or one of the main outcomes of one discussion group was that the host farmer had to take out a number of paddocks in front of the cows and get them back into the right cover in around 1,300 kilos. So I suppose it's important, as well, to walk your farm even twice a week, especially we're heading into peak growth rates now at the moment.
And I suppose a new feature in the last couple of months on the Grass 10 newsletter is predicted growth rates. Based on the growth rates for next week, would you be confident with the advice you're giving us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Elodie has been working on the grass growth model there in Moore Park, and she's currently running this model on 40 commercial farms, and I suppose she's coming back there with a growth rate for next week, second week of June, in around 80 kilos of dry matter on average. So definitely our farm, if we keep going the way we're going, our farm cover next week is even going to be higher than it is today. So I suppose that gives us confidence, I suppose, to take out these paddocks and to get our cows eating good quality grass. And I suppose in 3 weeks' time, these paddocks will be back. They'll be nice after grass, excellent quality. Cows are going to like it, and as a result, they're going to produce a lot of milk and good quality milk off it as well.
So I suppose just to recap in terms of the action we're taking, get out and walk the farm, and you're targeting 2 times per week.
Yeah.
We're looking at identifying those heavy covers and taking them out as bale silage and ensuring we're grazing a cover of 1,500 or less.
Yeah, that'd be a good summary. Yeah, and I suppose it's just important as well that these paddocks that you are taking off for surplus silage, it might be important maybe to get out dirty water to them, or maybe to spread a compound. Because I suppose what we've seen in farms is that these taking off these surplus bales is a big drain on soil fertility, especially K. So I suppose to get out with your compound or a bit of slurry just after cutting them and try to get the grass back growing again.
Before we look at the overall grass picture from 2019, let's hear from Elodie, who Micheal mentioned a few moments ago about her grass growth prediction model.
To predict grass growth, we're using first of all the weather, so historical to know what happened before, but also the forecast weather. We're predicting grass growth on 40 farms, so each individual farm has a forecast for their own farm. Then we're using the soil also. So the soil, it can be either an heavy soil or a more free drainage soil. And then you have the biomass. So to predict grass growth each day, basically for each paddock on each farm, we calculate a potential growth. That potential growth depends on solar radiation and the biomass on each paddock. And then that potential growth is decreased depending on the temperature. If it's either too cold or too warm, there is less growth, on the nitrogen availability in the soil, and also of the water availability in the soil. So if there is not enough water in the soil, it's going to decrease.
So Elodie, you mentioned 40 farms. Where are these farms located?
So those farms are all across the country. We try to spread them out as much as possible. And the criteria to select those farms was farmers which were recording cover regularly, so more than 30 cover last year, and also which were recording fertiliser application.
And that's on a weekly basis or what?
Yeah, weekly. Well, right now they are recording fertiliser application each week for us.
And you mentioned for these 40 farms, there is an individual weather forecast. You know, how are you predicting that? So
Meteran is sending me a weather forecast for each of those 40 farms for 7 days in advance. So I gave them the GPS coordinate of those 40 farms, and Meteran is sending me the specific forecast for those 40 farms.
And I know, you know, we often laugh about the weather is very unpredictable in Ireland, and sometimes the forecast is very wrong. How accurate have you seen them to be in terms of forecasting? I know it's quite a short period, 7 days.
Yeah, well, it depends. Most of the time it's very good for the 2 or 3 first days. And then the further away you go, the more the weather is unpredictable. So that's always a problem, yeah.
And then in terms of soil type, you're referring to kind of a heavier soil versus a sandy soil. So I suppose, is that a kind of an indication of soil moisture deficit?
Yeah, exactly. That's what would be.
So I guess in a year like last year, I mean, your heavier soils are probably, you know, are going to be growing more grass.
Exactly. So your heavier soil will keep growing, while the more drier soil, so more sandy soil, would have stopped growing way earlier due to the lack of the water in the soil.
And when you refer to biomass then and radiation, talk us through where there's a heavier cover or more biomass on a paddock. Do you expect to see more or less growth from radiation?
Exactly. So basically there's an interaction between, so there's two, in the potential growth, there's either the biomass, so the higher the biomass, the higher will be the growth on the paddock, the potential growth anyway. And same thing with the solar radiation. So the more sun you're going to have during a day, the more your potential growth will be.
Okay. In terms of nitrogen, you're predicting the amount of nitrogen going to be spread or that has been spread in the past?
Which has been spread. So all I know about the nitrogen and how much nitrogen fertilizer the farmer would have applied since the beginning of the year for each of the paddock. So that gives me a good indication of how much nitrogen is still in the soil. But I can't know what the farmer is going to do next week. I can predict grass growth, but I cannot predict what the farmer will do.
And I suppose then in a combination of your nitrogen and your soil type, do you account for background nitrogen, or is it just what farmers are spreading?
Well, there is also, the model is predicting mineralization and immobilization also. So that's taken into account in the model too.
Okay, excellent. And then you're referring to, the grass cover and the nitrogen on a paddock basis. So then you give us an overall farm figure, would that be right?
Yeah, so what I try to do is I check which paddock were considered for the previous week in PastureBase to calculate the grass growth into PastureBase, and I use the same paddock to predict the grass growth for the following week. So let's say that if paddock are in silage, they won't be in the prediction.
When we look at farms across the country, there are some farms that are measuring, on a Monday. That's generally a popular day, the first day of the week to get the job done. But some farmers will do it on, say, a Wednesday.
Yeah.
What day are you predicting a farm to grow?
So I'm predicting Monday to Sunday.
So technically then, if I'm measuring on a Wednesday, it's not going to be 100% accurate for me.
Exactly. It's not going to be exactly the same, because if it was growing a lot during Monday and Tuesday and very badly the next Monday and Tuesday, it will be. So the prediction will be overestimated.
And I guess with any of these predictions, this is a prediction, so it's not a 100% science, there is going to be, I suppose, inaccuracies, and it might be slightly out. So if you say predicted for next week we're going to grow 80 kilos dry matter, what's the variation there that you have seen over the last couple of weeks and months?
I would say plus minus 10-15 kilos.
And what are the varying factors that are changing that?
So apart from, obviously, no model are perfect, but you have a big impact of the weather forecast. So for example, if it's predicted to be a very sunny day tomorrow and it's actually raining for the full day, your growth, the model would have over-predicted the growth. And there is also the fact that I don't know what the farmer will do next week, so where he will spread nitrogen, which paddock will be cut, which paddock will be taken into account. So that's a big variation on that point.
I think it's an excellent tool, Elodie. When I think about what grass is growing on the farm next week, do I look back at last year, or do I look back at an average of 2 or 3 years to get a good indication? So I think this is a really fabulous planning tool that we can use going forward in terms of, I suppose, the grass in the cow's diet and maybe what supplement we need to put in. I guess you're going to be at the open day in the coming weeks. I think you've answered a lot of our questions, but maybe if anyone has a further burning question, you'll be available.
I will be there, in the PastureBase tent, I think,
To finish up this week's episode, Micheal gives us an overall picture of grass trends for the year to date.
Yeah, so I suppose it has been an excellent year for grass growth. 2019 will be one to remember so far anyway. So I suppose at the moment, majority of farmers are in their fourth rotation. Some of them are starting their fifth. Roughly about 5 to 6 ton of grass is grown on average on these farms, which is probably about a ton ahead of this time last year. So I suppose I suppose the more paddocks that you take out and the more paddocks that you graze and you speed up the rotation, the more grass you're going to grow. So I suppose it is important that your rotation length is we'll say 18 to 20 days. And I suppose just one way of calculating that, I suppose, is to divide the area that you are grazing per day into the total area that's available for grazing. And you can calculate your rotation length according to that. And if you are, we'll say 24, 25 days, I suppose it is another indication that maybe you might have too much grass on your farm. And again, ideally to measure and put your details into PastureBase, but definitely if you can walk your farm, add up how many days grass you have on your farm, you'll get a good indication then as well of where you stand.
Just to repeat on that's an interesting one I've never heard before, Micheal. In terms of your rotation length, how do you suggest we calculate it? Yeah,
so if you divide the area that you're grazing per day into the area that's available for grazing, you'll get your rotation length there. So again, the target for this time of the year is somewhere around 20 days, but again, depending on growth, it could be as low as 17. So I suppose 20 is only a guide.
Okay, excellent. That's great. Thank you, Micheal.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Micheal O'Leary and Elodie Ruelle for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Age.